Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, a do tank renowned across the Commonwealth. Find out more about us at virginiainstitute.org. We also keep all archived footage, as it were, of this program, audio only, at our YouTube channel. Search Freedom and Prosperity Radio. It is the single most essential issue that there is. I know we could apply that to so many things, but really at the end of the day, as we wander down this road towards more and more democracy, the voting becomes a real key. As I think it was Stalin said, it doesn't matter who votes, it's who counts the votes. Joining us at the bleeding edge of trying to reform election integrity, put faith back into it, is Clay Percle, Fairfax GOP election integrity team leader. Clay, welcome to Freedom and Prosperity Radio. How are you doing, sir?
Good morning. I'm doing great. I really appreciate you having me this morning to talk about this very important issue.
Well, I appreciate you doing it because so many people are told, oh, it's a myth. You're out there searching for Bigfoot. You guys are so crazy. But all it takes, to me, if you do the math, if you take every precinct and get 6 ballots in there at each precinct level, each voting booth, if you get 6 ballots in there, you can change an entire election. And that doesn't seem like all that hard to do when you look at retirement communities and the event coordinators that have even gone to prison in Virginia. What have you guys in Fairfax been able to see? Where did it begin for you? What did you find? And then where have you gone with that?
Well, yeah, no, that's a really great point. My observation of what happened in November obviously gave me great pause because I knew that there were enough questions. I'm a retired Air Force fighter pilot. I know where to perceive threats, and where there's smoke, there's fire. And so I really was interested in trying to better understand the scope of the problem. Mm-hmm. And really what I recognized was, regardless of the breadth and depth of actual fraud, there was a wide perception of fraud, which is just as important, because the second order effect of that is you get an electorate that believes they're disenfranchised. And if they don't have an election process that they can believe in, regardless of what the real level of fraud is, that perception disenfranchises them. And that's something that I advocated very strongly, was to try to get to the bottom, not so that we could relitigate last November. That is not our objective. We're not trying to figure out whether the election was stolen from Donald Trump at all. What we are trying to do is we're trying to identify the processes going forward in Fairfax County, in the broader Commonwealth, that we can help work toward, even though the Democrats currently have a trifecta, that we can try to work toward, because our mission is to restore and ensure fair and transparent elections in Fairfax County, but also the public confidence therein, and not just through propaganda and hand waving and trying to cover up problems, but actually identifying those problems. So we're working with a lot of different organizations that are like-minded. This is obviously a hot button issue, but we are working specifically with those who care about action, not just talk. And so we've formulated a team, almost 70 volunteers. We have a core steering committee of 8 of us that meet weekly. We integrate with these other organizations, and we're taking action. So we have been driving to analyze every allegation that's out there and try to identify the ones that really have merit, because there are some that are far-fetched, and we appreciate that. And we look into those because we have to look into all of them so that we can say with confidence that, yes, this is where the risk is, or it's not, and that we can focus our energy on really the things that they're not as sensational, maybe as voting machines and hacking and cyber threats, but it's really where the other side puts the thumb on the scale. And so that's a lot harder to identify. It's a lot harder to see, but it's small things like, where are the drop boxes placed? Are they placed in primarily Democratic precincts and areas? And that's what we're finding. It's these small things that put the thumb on the scale that we're trying to really shine the light, and the cockroaches are scattering.
Well, and you look at what happened in Georgia when all they did was they took something that wasn't even part of their election law, those drop boxes, said, okay, we're going to do drop boxes, but they can only be at already designated polling places so that there's some security and that there's still the same nature of the beast. As you say, it's not just drop boxes where the people are going to vote predominantly one party or the other. Yet people lost their collective municipal bowel control over that. And we have Delta Airlines and the rest of the woke capitalists saying boycott, Georgia. And by the way, we fly to China.
That's right. The hypocrisy is astounding. We stand with Georgia. We stand with states. We stand with the Constitution because HR now SB1 is a serious threat to the states' rights, to our constitutional process, and it's a big DC power grab to try to ensure that while they have power and while they consolidate power and do things like trying to pack the Senate via DC statehood and pack the court and get rid of the filibuster, they're trying to push us to a one-party system. And in doing so, they're trying to take all the power from the states. And the woke mob that you spoke about, there's very little that we're going to be able to do on our team to prevent that sort of corporate weak activism and bowing to the uninformed and angry on Twitter. A few voices that are loud and threatening. There's very little we can do to that, but what we can do is we can stand up here in our locality and act locally, and we are getting involved. So our big call to action for everyone that maybe has just been a casual voter who maybe just votes every 4 years, or even they vote in the midterms, to understand that in Virginia we have an election every year, and we need people not only to cast ballots, but we in the Republican Party have really been remiss in ensuring that we have enough election officers, poll watchers, and seasonal staff. Because what they don't understand is we're supposed to be 50-50, but in reality, we're just a small fraction of the people filling those positions, and then so Democrats get to fill them. So we've really done a piss poor job. And so we have got to get people engaged. We call on them now. Now's the time to apply to be an election officer in the early voting, because like you said, it's an election season now. So this November is where we have to fight to break the trifecta so that we can get reasonable, pragmatic legislation and policy back into the Commonwealth.
Clay Percle is on with us. He's the head of the election integrity team out of Fairfax with the Republican Party. But this, Clay, I would argue if you watch the disenfranchisement that leads people to follow into some of these protest marches under the auspices of Black Lives Matter and Antifa, we've got two, what would be considered opposite ends of the spectrum, both agitated under the idea of our government is not listening to us anymore, our needs are not being addressed, and or we're not being heard when we vote, or the people we voted for have ignored us, and yet the artful politician is kind of sneaking out the back door while we have it's like the old Western movie where the guy who started the bar fight is sneaking out the back door while the bar fight is going on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's hey, I don't like you. Why don't you two go fight? And it's a very brilliant political ploy. And you're right that both ends of the spectrum, I think they can get around a growing populism. And regardless of where you fall politically, you have to admit that a fundamental American principle, not a party principle, is limited government and individual liberty. Mm-hmm. And the biggest fear, and really election integrity is a small part of it, but my greatest concern is that we are pushing toward a tipping point, particularly with going toward a one-party system, or it could be a two-party system only, in image, like in Russia, where they have elections, but what the outcome is going to be. But pushing toward that type of system where the people's voice isn't heard, and your Stalin quote was spot on. Elections are how that's done, and so that's what we're trying to get to the bottom of. We're trying to shine a light. We realize, I tell you what, when I lived in Norfolk for a while, we had an issue with porch pirates stealing packages, and what I did was I put a fake camera on the porch, and guess what? We never had another package stolen. it didn't matter whether I was able to actually catch anyone. It mattered that they knew they were being watched. And so what we believe now is we are on every single board meeting for our Fairfax County Election Board, and we are asking hard questions. They know the flashlight is on. We're going to ensure that they don't try to pull the shenanigans that they did in 2020.
Now, you mentioned poll watchers. I've been a poll watcher. It's not as daunting or dangerous as people might think. Oh, I don't want to be there. I don't want to have the scarlet letter R on my chest or anything like that, Clay. It really isn't, because what you see on the evening news is not what the rank and file, somebody who's agreed to spend Election Day counting ballots, they're not out there saying, oh, I want to burn him at the stake or anything like that. Generally speaking, the folks... you know who the lawyers are. Call the lawyers when something looks hinky. But when you have 45 days and the registrars are counting ballots for 45 days without a soul watching them, because who could have that many volunteers for 45 days, all the different absentee precincts in all the different municipalities across the Commonwealth? That's impossible. And I believe that former Congressman Tom Garrett once said to me, he said, well, Virginia didn't legalize voter fraud. They just made it impossible to catch or prosecute.
That's right. You're exactly right. Being a poll watcher shouldn't be so daunting, but now that it's election season, you're exactly right, which is why a lot of what we're pushing for also is the seasonal staff folks. So people, that can apply to the county, they can actually get hired on, they can be there internal to the process when all this is happening. But we're trying to shine that light so that when all this backroom counting is happening, and there's stories, of particularly with ballot curing going on with some of these mail-in ballots where they were removed from the envelopes and then stored, before, and they shouldn't have, and they weren't counted. So a lot of this is getting looked into. And the bottom line is we have folks who are throwing up their hands just saying, well, what can we possibly do? We can't do anything because the Dems have a trifecta. I'm just not even going to get involved. I'm not going to vote, which I would just tell everyone is absolutely the wrong approach. We are not a nation of quitters. We have got to stand up for liberty and democracy, and that every vote counts. I love the expression that it should be easy to vote and hard to cheat. Basic pragmatic policies that everyone can probably get on board with, that in no way are racist or in no way disenfranchise any particular minority group. Because to be honest, we are the party of liberty. Yeah. It's the Democrat Party that was behind Jim Crow. They stood against enfranchisement of minorities. We are the party who has tried to ensure that every person's vote counts. And so I just encourage everyone to get out, be involved, be that poll watcher, be that election officer, apply to be seasonal staff if you can do that. A lot of folks are retired looking to get engaged. It's a great way to do that and get a little bit of pocket money and serve your county and your Commonwealth as well.
You mentioned this, and it's something I've argued about, and I use this as the analogy. If the Virginia Department of Transportation waited until the weatherman said snow is coming in the forecast to hire plow drivers, and they're on the phone with the temp agency saying, got any plow drivers for me? We'd have pretty bad results when it came to getting our roads cleared in the snow. Yet that's what we do with elections. We wait until it's August, and then we send out the call for, we start calling temp agencies, and we start saying who wants to be a poll worker, who wants to volunteer, or who wants to work for a few weeks for the Department of Elections. If this is supposedly more than lip service, how important we view voting, shouldn't Virginia treat it more seriously as a function of government protecting the sanctity of what I view as legal documents?
Well, I think you make a great point. What we have found is, particularly dealing with outside money and strings attached. And so, for instance, the Zuckerberg funds, over $4 million came to Virginia. About $1.4 million of that was to Fairfax County. We pressed the election board and got a report that they were required to file back with the foundation on how they use that money. The vast majority of the money was spent for additional staff to try to cover all these different locations. But our big question is, well, I wonder where all that staff came from.
Right.
So I bet we can identify the types of agencies and organizations that they're ready to pull from. And so this may end up being a FOIA request. Our legal and policy arm is looking into this, trying to get more fidelity from that. But that's part of that thumb on the scale. And again, it's not as sensational. We're certainly looking at things like voting machines and communication cards. And I know you spoke with Hans von Spakovsky of the Heritage Foundation. Great guy. We spoke the last time at the Election Integrity Summit in Harrisonburg, and we see very much eye to eye on this. In legal action, we've got to be prepared, and we have got to hold these counties and these election boards and registrars to task and make clear lines in the sand that when you cross this line and you violate the law and the code, we're going to hold you to task, and we're going to take you to court if need be.
Last one, Clay, and I want to find out how we can help more as well in your efforts there. But I mentioned this in the onset that I view a vote as a legal contract. And maybe this is part of the problem. We treat voting as this cavalier thing that we do, but it's really it should be viewed as a legal document. You wouldn't let somebody just fill out a new will or a new medical directive every couple of days, or you certainly wouldn't want somebody writing a last will and testament for you without your knowledge or filling your name out on it. So things like signatures, things like identification for it. If maybe we as a narrative started reminding people that your vote is a legal document, they would take it more seriously, and maybe we would prosecute the fraudsters a little more thoroughly, the same way we would prosecute somebody who was trying to steal from an elderly woman by rewriting her last will and testament.
Yeah, potentially. And what bigger steal can there be than your right to vote? Because when someone votes illegally, that disenfranchises someone else. Mm-hmm. It takes away their vote. It cancels out their vote. And our biggest concern, we've seen the Texas Attorney General, step up and mention their record of prosecutions and how that's really increasing. But there's clear evidence, but the number of cases that have been prosecuted is just the tip of the iceberg. We have attorneys general who don't have the courage to step up and enforce the law. And we're a nation of laws, and you're exactly right. That is a legal document. And if it's done fraudulently, almost every state has laws on the books to deal with that, whether it's non-citizen or voting out of their state or misrepresenting their residence, whatever the case may be, all the way to actually harvesting ballots illegally and filling them out fraudulently. All of that happens, but we don't have attorneys general who are standing up and taking a stand for their citizens and prosecuting these. And so laws that are unenforced just aren't laws. And there's no disincentive, no discouragement, no risk. So we put forward a number of individuals who got registered via motor voter who are non-citizens. Now, whether that was done intentionally through malice or it was an oversight, in any case, none of those individuals were further investigated or pursued by the Attorney General for any type of legal action. So there's really no risk. And so the left is going to learn from that. They're going to say, well, hey, if they don't prosecute them and they don't even investigate them, let's just have those types of drives to register people, whether they're valid citizens and should be registered voters or not. And that should really frighten everyone.
Well, and it's ironic because I have friends who, just don't like Donald Trump, so they immediately say there was no such thing, you couldn't have voter harvesting to that level. I'm like, but it's 3 or 6 per election precinct. And they shrug and they go, they wouldn't go to that minute detail. They're expecting a moving truck with voting ballots, boxes of ballots showing up. That's not how they're doing it. They're doing it with a billion paper cuts. And I appreciate you chasing it around, Clay. How can the listener help you out in your efforts? Are you doing fundraising? Do you have a GoFundMe page, Patreon? How can we help?
So we are all just volunteer based. FCRC funds our efforts, but the way that we have lots of volunteers, we have lots of energy behind our efforts. What we really need is that call for involvement at the local level in every county. Please contact your county wherever you live and find out what your process is for getting brought on as an election officer, as a poll watcher, for being able to come on board as seasonal staff, and encourage one another to do that. And then of course, get out and actually vote. Exercise this right. We cannot do what Georgia did in January. The call to action is to not only secure our election process, but to use it. And that's the only way that if we can break the trifecta, and we will, I believe, in November, get out and vote, we're going to have legislation that's ready to go. And when we can break the log jam and we can start getting some of that back in place, we can start getting back to where the Commonwealth was, which was very reasonable and pragmatic election law that did ensure that it was easy to vote and hard to achieve. So that would be my call to action.
Absolutely. And this makes this year so important with, whether or not there's an attorney general willing to chase these cases down, to take the slings and arrows, a General Assembly ready to put legislation on a governor's desk, and I appreciate everything you do for that, Clay. You can find them again, fairfaxgop.org. Thank you so much, sir, and thank you for joining us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Coming up next, it's adjunct to this because we were told that though the grocery stores can stay open, our polls couldn't. Maybe we should have just deputized Kroger and replaced the State Board of Elections with them. But John Tamney, director of FreedomWorks Center for Economic Freedom, has got a new book out, When Politicians Panicked, the New Coronavirus Expert Opinion and a Tragic Lapse of Reason. Next on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.